United Nations report suggests illicit financial flows from Africa have worsened. It says from 2013 to 2015, annual capital flight from Africa averaged about $88 billion per year. Legal capital outflows from three countries, Nigeria, Egypt and South Africa, accounted for over 4/5 of the annual total during the same period. To discuss this, we're joined by Peter Fabricius from the Institute of Security Studies. Peter, very good morning to you. Why has it got worse?
Yeah, because it just seems that in essence the malpractices, if you want to put it that way, that Thabo Mbeki had identified in his report in 2015, which is quite a landmark report, have not really been fully addressed. There are efforts, the OECD, which represents the rich countries, G20 and so on, are trying to do this through initiatives, so the so-called BEPS initiative, base erosion and profit shifting initiative, to try to reform international tax systems to prevent that happening. To actually eradicate tax havens in effect. But they're having some success at the margins, but evidently not enough. And even in Africa, as my report in the ICS suggests, there are countries like Mauritius and Seychelles that make a lot of money, also acting as offshore tax bases for corporations, including some in South Africa.
And considering Africa's domestic tax base is so small, I mean, this money is really needed.
Yeah, what the report says is that Africa is particularly vulnerable to these practices by multinationals because they rely more heavily on them than others, because our domestic tax, as you say, our tax bases tend to be pretty small. Obviously, South Africa is something of an exception, although, proportionately also I think that is a problem. So it's critical, and the report actually points out that Africa hasn't done enough itself to address the problem.
And it's a problem that it's hard to beat, considering if you take South Africa, for example, many businesses don't have confidence here. They're worried about how their taxes are going to be used and would rather not put that money back. So they are incentivized to take their money elsewhere. Yeah,
that is a problem. And ours, in spite of all the capture of the last few years, I guess it's getting back to normal, is probably the best, tax system, one of the best on the continent. Used to be quite exemplary before the Guptas arrived. But yes, that is a problem. That how do you've got to? I mean, it's not just it's not a problem that you can address in specific terms. You have to address the whole question of governance, really, right across the board in many countries, in most countries on the continent.
Peter, it was interesting in your report that you found that African countries had very little to say, actually, that they didn't contribute enough to sorting out the problem, coming up with their own suggestions. Why are they so quiet about this?
There have been some initiatives. There's a tax forum and so on that's addressing these questions, that works quite hard, like drawing up model tax treaties which countries can apply. But at the top political level, and I guess if you would say at the African Union level, there just doesn't seem to have been the necessary political will and energy, and which is surprising in a way, because the AU has been working for some years, since Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma was actually the chairperson of the African Union Commission, to make Africa less dependent on African Union less dependent on outside donations. So they're conscious of this need for greater financial independence. And this is really the way one of the routes to financial independence is to have a viable tax system that capture all the money that's due, the revenue that's due to the continent.
And if we keep hemorrhaging money at the rate that we are, and if we're not able to plug those loopholes, close the loopholes, what happens?
Yeah, there's a problem. What I didn't really go into, because I don't think the report did much either, the UNCTAD report, is that this is happening in the middle of the COVID crisis, when there's a massive revenue problem, So we're having countries that are beginning to default on loans. Zambia, for example, last week asked 3 of its major private bondholders to please give it a 6-month moratorium on payments of interest and capital. And so this is, these are the sort of things which, if these countries had more financial reserves and more financial resilience, they would be able to withstand. So it's quite a critical moment, actually, to be discussing this.
It is indeed. Peter Fabricius, good to talk to you. Thank you.